You are listening to the GodArchy podcast, where we shove a crowbar between state and church. This is the spot where Christian faith intersects with libertarian anarchism and voluntaryism. I'm your host, Mike Meharry. In this episode, we're going to be talking about making politics matter less. Greetings, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the GodArchy podcast. As always, I very much appreciate you tuning into the show. Today, I'm going to be talking with Jeff Deist. Jeff is the president of the Mises Institute. He was also a longtime advisor and chief of staff to Congressman Ron Paul. He's been around libertarianism for a long time, and I've been wanting to talk to Jeff for quite a while. We've had several private conversations about faith and culture and the importance of religion, and I just thought it would be really interesting to just kind of talk to Jeff and see where the conversation leads. If y'all haven't figured out yet, most of the time I go into these interviews with just kind of a vague idea of what I want to talk about, and this was particularly true with this interview. I had some ideas, some things that I wanted to talk to Jeff about that we cover, particularly relating to culture and the importance of religion in culture. But the conversation very quickly evolved into a discussion about politics and the role politics plays in the world, which both of us agree is far too large. In fact, we're in a world now where we've basically politicized everything. I mean, I can't even turn on a baseball game without getting inundated by some political messaging. I think I actually talk about this with Jeff. You know, my mom went to lunch with a couple of friends, and her friends got in this big argument about whether or not you should drink Coca-Cola because Coke had done something, you know, to disrupt the political whatever. When Coca-Cola becomes a political issue, I think you've got problems. So Jeff and I talk about that and about the need to make politics matter less. What institutions, what ways of organizing ourselves, what ways of relating to each other can we elevate as we try to lower the role of politics? Because ultimately, you know, politics is just war by different means. It is ultimately violence, force, and coercion. Jeff makes this point during our conversation. It's very true. And that's what I'm all about here with GodArchy, is lowering and limiting the violence, force, and coercion, because it does not reconcile with our Christian faith. God is not a God of violence, force, and coercion. Jesus is not a savior who came to impose his will by the sword or by force. And so we need to try to find ways as Christians to make the world look more like what Jesus taught us. And politics is not the way to do that. So really good conversation with Jeff. I appreciate him taking the time coming on and kind of being a guinea pig, because like I said, it was a pretty loosey-goosey interview, but a really good conversation. I think you'll enjoy it. So let's go ahead and bring on Jeff Deist. So I am here now with Mr. Jeff Deist. How are you doing, Jeff?
I'm doing fantastic. Thank you, Mike.
I appreciate you taking a little time to be on the show. One of the things that I wanted to touch on, and this has been a while back, but you posted, I think on Facebook or some social media site, a cartoon, which I now understand is actually a famous Norman Rockwell painting. And it kind of has the father, if you can imagine, sitting in a chair, reading the Sunday paper, and then the wife and kids are clearly dressed and heading to church. And I got the impression when I saw this post that that's kind of where you are spiritually, and also got the impression that regardless of your participation in the institution of religion, that you felt like that religion is an important part of our society, so to speak. I hate the term society, but for using it in the good term of people interacting together.
Well, yeah, that painting really hits home for me. You know, you and I are old enough to remember when the Sunday paper was a big, thick thing.
Yes.
And you opened it up, it had all those ads in it, and it had the funnies. And it was a big deal. You could spend several hours with your local Sunday paper when we were kids. And so I have sort of fond memories of that. And also the guys wearing slippers underneath his bathrobe and pajamas, and I'm old enough to own slippers as well.
Right.
So I'm really dating myself here, man, oh man. But I mean, if you don't mind a little personal note,
no,
on
absolutely.
the show, this is sort of where I am. I thought it was a funny analogy, and people can just Google Norman Rockwell Sunday Morning to see it.
Yeah, I'll post
because he's sort of smoking a cigarette and his hair is disheveled and he's got the paper strewn all about, while his very neatly coiffed wife and apparently 3 kids in their Sunday best are marching off dutifully to church. And so in my own life, my wife is a very serious Catholic. I am not. I grew up Protestant and not very Protestant, as a matter of fact. And so, she has raised our 2 children to be Catholics. And so that's where they head off on Sunday morning. And I'm sometimes home with the dog. And so that's, it was appropriate in that sense, but also I think in a larger sense, like probably some of your listeners, I think in libertarian circles in general, there's a lot of agnosticism and atheism.
Sure.
And I went through a very obnoxious, I guess, Randian atheist phase in my middle teens, maybe up even into undergraduate, that religion was irrational.
Right.
Religion was based on something in faith. And I never got into that sort of obnoxious atheist, like, oh, you're magical sky god, ha, ha, ha.
I hate that.
It wasn't like that. But I am thankful that social media didn't exist at the time for me to offer the world my totally unnecessary, obnoxious views, right? And I've definitely mellowed in my middle age, and I've really come around to the idea that institutions are very, very important. That's gotten me in a little bit of hot water from time to time in suggesting that libertarianism ought not to be so hostile to things like family and religion.
Right.
And but I think let's take a postmodernist critique that there's no knowable truth claims, that maybe our entire world or our entire perception of it is some sort of simulation, and how can we even know what we know? Just an outright attack on epistemology or whatever. Right. Then, my response to that at this point in my life would be, well, so what? In other words, what's wrong if we use our delusions?
Right.
I mean, if those delusions have a benefit in terms of giving human beings comfort, in terms of making human beings better at interacting with each other and more peaceable, then so what? It goes back to there's no atheists in foxholes. Right. I mean, I think it's tough for someone like me to begin to look at Enlightenment thinking, especially given the Misesian, Kantian, tradition of reason. Right. And to say, well, there's a little more something there. And perhaps the Enlightenment and what our current modernity hasn't served us as well as we think. And so I really think that religion, far from being some sort of silly crutch for people, is an attempt by people to have a cohesive or coherent philosophical, organizational approach to life, rather than just ad hocism, hedonism, pure selfishness, not in the Randian sense, but in the sort of like day-to-day sense, pinging around without a plan, but maybe hurting other people along the way, along the ride in life. Right. And it strikes me that religious people are attempting to have a framework. And that doesn't mean they always live up to it, but I get a little tired of atheists and agnostics throwing stones at that glass house. And so I know Douglas Murray said something along the lines of, religious people are at least trying. And I think this is, in a sense, how the left views itself. So when Al Gore or John Kerry are criticized for having 5 private jets or 6 houses or flying around, burning carbon willy-nilly, while preaching environmentalism, I think a lot of folks on the left, to be fair to the left, would say, but we're trying. At least we have climate change or a green environment as a goal.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, we may lapse from time to time. We may all be sinners in the woke church of left, but at least we're trying. So there's maybe a parallel or an analogy there. But and the other thing that Douglas Murray has said is that it's entirely possible for people to come to religion and to come to faith, and I guess this would have to be the case for me personally, through the rituals or through the cultural aspects of it or the social aspects of it. In other words, you know people at church, you enjoy going to church, you have social benefits from going to church. Some people even have business benefits. You're in the right church in the right town, and you're a lawyer or a CPA or something or a dentist, and you get clients, right? And so through these other ways, you don't have to immediately say, I need to have 100% faith in X, Y, and Z biblical events.
Right.
And the triumvirate or whatever it might be, depending on your particular denomination. I can sort of get to those things. And I guess that's what I'm feeling and in my own life. And maybe this is just the weakness of middle age, where you start to say, oh, I have some aches and pains and I'm not going to live forever. And my cognitively and certainly athletically and in many, many other areas, my best years are behind me now that I'm in my 50s and yada, yada, yada. Right. And so maybe this is the version of there's no atheists in foxholes. I haven't really faced death.
Right.
But, hey. And so the idea that the strident Randians hold that this is all just human frailty and weakness. Mm-hmm. Shut up. Shut the hell up.
Well, you know what? I'm going to admit I'm a frail, weak human in certain aspects. I guess that's part of this whole process of getting older. I think the older we get, the more we realize that we don't really have our head wrapped around everything as much as we would have liked to have thought when we were in our 20s. We get dumber as we learn more. It's that kind of, you recognize that there's so much that we don't understand, that you become a little bit more open to maybe thinking about different things.
Yeah, and I just wonder, I guess on a bigger scale, is what secular America is really going to look like. And I think it's going to be a nastier place than neoliberals imagine it's going to be.
Yeah, I think so too. In a sense, you're replacing one faith framework with another. And I think the kind of difference is that I think there's a faith in the whole secular, particularly as you get into leftist politics, that human beings can mold the world into their image, that we can micromanage the economy, we can micromanage the environment. If we just do the science right, we can, end pandemics. And there's this, I think, misplaced faith in human ability to control everything in the world around them. So there's instead of a faith in a higher being, there's a faith in humanity as a whole. And I'm not sure that that's necessarily well placed either.
Well, sure. You and I would be political atheists. Right. And probably sound just as obnoxious to most people.
I'm sure.
As religious atheists, right? That they would say, "Oh, come on! There's always been governments. They always coalesce. They take different forms, but you're just being ridiculous with these admonitions." And on the idea of post-Christian America, or not even post-Christian, just post-God, what replaces God? Because I do think that Christianity is on the wane.
I think so.
In the United States of America. I don't think there's any question about that. There's a tidal wave, and you can sort of say, well, we're going to use a little bucket and bail it out. But I don't know about that. I mean, I think these are big trends that are awfully hard to reverse. And I think they're if they are reversed, it's probably going to be the result of something unpleasant, like a war, right, or a very serious economic shock or something like that. So, the question really is, what's faith? I mean, we could argue certainly that faith in government is every bit as silly as faith in literal biblical miracles, right, or what have you. So that's interesting to me. But I guess I guess a lot of it comes down to hubris. I don't like hubris.
Yeah.
To me, I view the state with suspicion because I think human history is about muddling through. And muddling through, to me, means market mechanisms are almost always best.
Yeah.
That this is humans dealing with each other voluntarily or cooperatively, and given the scarce resources they have, and having actual profit and loss, not necessarily just in the economic or capital sense, but in the psychic sense,
right,
in terms of people, when things work or don't work, actual people have skin in the game. Mm-hmm. With that profit and loss. And so they put a lot more time and energy and effort into it, versus when a politician signs some bill that's $10 million for a new freeway by your house,
right.
There's not much care taken there. Mm-hmm. So that it strikes me that there's a lot of hubris within libertarian thought as well.
Yeah.
That if we just get rid of government, everything will be rosy. Human beings are always going to have some friction.
Sure.
Between them. And we happen to live in a time and a place where that friction doesn't go to basic necessities like food and mm-hmm. water and shelter for most of us. So that's very, very happy because that reduces those frictions.
Yeah.
But we're still animals underneath.
Right.
And so what you get rid of God, and then you have the Faucis of the world, you have scientism, you have that. What I really don't like is the two things I really dislike, and I'm going to show my biases here. I really dislike futurism, and I really dislike transhumanism.
Yeah,
because to me they are both just extreme examples of hubris, and this idea that our previous generations are always so benighted. That everything had happened before. And I understand there's the racial stuff. A lot of people were, suffered oppression.
Sure.
But that doesn't negate the fact that we are all standing on the shoulders of giants. And I mean that not just in the material sense of the world around us. There's just a Starbucks everywhere. Do you know what it takes to have a Starbucks everywhere?
Yeah.
It takes a lot. It takes our great grandparents, among other things.
Right.
But also, why would we ever throw out all the accumulated wisdom and knowledge we have just because we're so hostile to tradition? I mean, I think you can go back to there are plenty of conservatives in the history of conservative thought, even in the 20th century. You don't have to go back farther than that necessarily, who would say, look, we get it. Unyielding adherence to tradition is a bad idea. That's not rational. We ought to examine traditions, and we ought to treat them like a buffet. You can pick and choose. But throwing them all out with the bathwater and saying that everything that happened, prior to the Civil Rights Act of 1965 or mm-hmm. prior to World War I or whatever, was bad, strikes me as a big mistake. And I think that informs not only my worldview, and I think that's why a lot of people sort of like, oh, that Deist guy is a right libertarian. He's really a conservative in sheep's clothing,
right?
And that's fine. Maybe I am. I mean, that's my view of the world is that I'm not so smart. I know that. Mm-hmm. Most of us in libertarian circles are of, pretty reasonable, moderate intelligence. Right. Let's just be frank.
Sure.
We're not originators. We are very happy secondhand dealers in ideas.
Yeah.
From better minds than ours. And there's not a damn thing wrong with that. And so, when you go from there, I think that counsels humility in thinking. And so it's precisely because we don't know what's best for, 20 million Floridians or 320 million Americans, right, or 8 billion people in the world. It's precisely because we don't know what's best for everyone that I think we ought to be humble. I think we ought to be skeptical of government. And I think we ought to be exceedingly localist in our traditions. I think common law is the best way to deal not only locally in the geographic sense, but temporally mm-hmm. with where we are. Yeah. And that means that stealing a man's horse 200 years ago might have consigned him to death in the desert from dehydration.
Right.
Whereas stealing a man's horse today it is a very different matter. He's
Sure.
got a Ford F-150 too.
Right.
He can drive to 7-Eleven.
Yeah.
But you're still punish the guy for stealing a horse today. But supposedly, depending on the mythology you want to accept, that was punishable by death and hanging in the Old West.
Right.
So there are not only geographic differences in common law, how we deal with one another, but also temporal.
Yeah, that makes sense. Absolutely. So here's something that, kind of thinking about this whole idea of other institutions. I really feel like that maybe I don't know, maybe this is modernism, maybe it's the internet, but I think we tend to, and by we, I mean people in general, tend to focus in on a given ideology and try to make that be the be-all, end-all answer to everything. So in the last episode of the show, I had Norman Horn on. Do you know Norman?
I do.
Yeah. So Norman has a PhD in chemical engineering. And so we talked about science. So we talked about scientism, and we talked about the fact that science can tell us a lot about the world, but it can't tell us everything about the world. You can't make science tell you everything any more than you can make the Bible into a science book and make the Bible tell you everything. I think libertarians are guilty of this. They want to make this political philosophy answer all of the questions of life. And I think we need and I'm thinking this more and more the older that I get, is there needs to be kind of an integration of things in order for human beings to really understand the world around them. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, we desperately desire order, even in our minds. Mm-hmm. We want to ring fence everything and throw a framework around everything because it's a chaotic world. And that just drives us crazy on some level. Right. There's always that sort of tremor in the back of our minds. Saber-toothed tiger is headed our way.
Yeah.
And it's precisely that radar that allowed us to survive. Mm-hmm. Right. I mean, having a pessimistic worldview is an evolutionary adaptation.
Sure. I got that in spades.
A good one. Right.
Yeah.
It's a good one. But ideology, I think, here's a place where maybe we can make inroads with the left and the right. Is that, is liberty ideology, or is it the absence of one? I would argue in a lot of ways it's the absence of one. It's what happens when you leave people alone and they deal with each other cooperatively. Right. And so, look, a lot of people on both the left and right wouldn't buy that. They'd say, oh, my gosh, look, Murray Rothbard, you guys are the biggest ideologues of all time.
Right.
So I get that.
Yeah.
I get that. But the idea that we are going to sort of neatly solve things with an ideology or with, a political candidate or something like that is just, and as long as we don't have big wars and as long as we don't have big economic collapses, then, we can look at each other and say, hey, come on, we got hot and cold running water. We have food.
Right.
We have shelter. Our material comfort is so wildly beyond almost that of every human who ever walked the earth in history that we're very fortunate. And so we can have these philosophical thoughts, You got to take care of your basic needs before you can even be worried about intellectual life. Maslow's hierarchy.
Right.
So we're lucky just for starters. But my concern, and especially since I have kids, is are we screwing the pooch? Are we setting the seeds for a really destructive environment in the future? That's my overriding concern.
Yeah. I was talking to, I play ice hockey still, which some would say is foolish at my age, but it is what it is. There's a young man on our team who is just 19 years old. And I've had some interesting conversations in the locker room with him about his view of the world coming from, I guess, they're Gen Y. And, it's really interesting because he is a little bit, I'm knocking stuff over, don't mind me. He's a little bit wise for his age. And we were talking about the way his generation is viewing the world. And one of the things he pointed out was we've got all of these young people today that have anxiety and or depression. It's like rampant among his age group. He says everybody has this, they'll talk, I have anxiety. And he kind of focused that. He said he thinks a lot of it has to do with that we're living our lives in social media. And that, you mentioned this order. When we look at social media, we see everything that's going on, all over the world in real time. It's overwhelming sometimes, I think. And I think maybe he's gone to something about, this, instead of having community in our church or in our civic organizations or, at the city hall or whatever, we're trying to have community with everybody in the entire world on social media. And that concerns me too. I really feel like that's a disservice to young people today, because I look at my kids, I look at my stepdaughter in particular, I don't feel like she has a whole lot of community other than this virtual reality.
Well, that's going to be a tough one. P.J. O'Rourke wrote a book, I think it was called All the Trouble in the World. And it was about this political desire to go solve everything, like W's stupid war in Iraq, this inability to leave things alone. But when you take that to social media, it's like, are we really supposed to know? Are we wired to know about some disaster in Japan, for example?
Exactly.
Probably not. I mean, evolutionary scientists have now, this changes, but they now seem to think that we were sort of wired for groups or clans of about 300 people. Mm-hmm. And within a group that size, you knew where you were in the pecking order, and you were okay with it, and you came to terms, and it was pretty complimentary. And there were some people who were sort of the leads in hunting or whatever it might be, Right. But beyond that, maybe we're making ourselves crazy. And there's no question that social media companies understand the dopamine response and that they exploit this to keep you in their environment. Mm-hmm. That's the business they're in. And, we don't have to have Twitter. We don't have to have Facebook in our lives. It's not required of us.
Right.
So that worries me, because we're pinging around, and you start to wonder whether people will still be capable of deep work. Intellectual work. There's a kind of a funny anecdote in one of the Nixon biographies I read a long time ago, where he's going to law school, and one of his profs tells him, "You're going to be all right. You're going to do well in law school because you have an iron butt." And what he meant by that was he saw Nixon in the library, for hours. Right. Just simply reading and reading. And that's really what law school is. It's just reading a bunch of appellate cases for hours upon end. But
it's like working at the 10th Amendment Center.
Yeah. Except the 10th Amendment Center gets it right.
Yeah.
But the thing is I know that, and it's not just age. I know that my own capacity for sustained deep reading has fallen off.
Yeah.
It's harder. You have to readjust now. I read at least a book a week because I do a books podcast.
Right.
And sometimes when it's a big book, we break it up. But, boy, to ping back and forth between my email and social media and trying to get through the book and skimming parts of it and making notes for my guest and this and that, it's I do remember as a teen being able to really read, and sometimes that was just fun stuff, novels,
right?
Whatever you happen to have liked when you were young. But, maybe that's just my memory. That somehow it was easier then, but I think it was easier then.
I think so too. I definitely, the way I consume information today, you mentioned the newspaper. That was a big thing on Sunday, like you said. You'd spend half a day kind of hanging out and reading through the whole newspaper, and today it's like, after about 10 minutes, I feel like I need to do something else. There's something else that needs to be done. Or I'll get to the end of the day when normally I do have some block of time to read, and it's like, I'm just too tired to read, I'm going to watch TV. So the way that life runs, and I don't know if that's a function of just, if my grandfather would have said the same thing, I don't know. But I suspect not.
Yeah, it goes to a lot of things. It goes to time management and all those sorts of things. It goes to the values of what you prioritize. I try to do certain things in the morning, like Zero Hedge, that I wouldn't want to do at night. Don't read Zero Hedge before bed, kids.
No, definitely not.
That's like having a double espresso before bed.
Yeah.
But look, it's easier at night to turn on YouTube than it is to get back to another chapter of a book.
Yeah.
It's just, but we know it's like junk food. And we know that a little bit of junk food now and then is fine.
Right.
But if you eat junk food every day and it becomes a mainstay of your diet, you're going to have a problem. We know that. And we've let this become a mainstay of our diet.
For sure. So here's a question for you. How has your view of politics changed over the years? Like, you were staff of Ron Paul. You've been on Capitol Hill. Now you're at a I don't know what you call the Mises Institute. I hate the term think tank, but you're this wonderful organization doing great work. But how has your view of politics and what politics can actually accomplish, how has that changed and evolved over time?
Well, I hope I've become more anti-politics in the sense that not only recognizing the limits of politics, but oftentimes the futility of it. And so I would certainly argue for an aggressive localist approach. And I don't want to harm other people. I don't want politics to be weaponized in this country. And it really is. I mean, it's a harm ritual. Every 4 years, the presidential election is about using a proxy, even a dumb, witless ape like Biden, to inflict harm on people you don't like.
Right.
It's about vengeance, which strikes me as just a crazy, crazy way to organize society. So here's California, 40 million people, plenty of wealthy folks in that state, plenty of impoverished folks in that state. But countries like Norway, Switzerland, Sweden, there's several European countries which are under 10 million.
Right.
So a fraction of California's size. California has Silicon Valley. California has Hollywood and the tourism associated with that. It has beaches. It has deserts. It has mountains. It has access to Pacific Rim trade. It has ports. It has huge ports at Long Beach and San Pedro.
Right.
It has lots of great universities. It has an educated workforce. I mean, there's no reason California could not, if not a country, because of the difficulties in outright secession, the political difficulties inherent in outright secession. It could be a lot like a country.
Sure.
And we heard Gavin Newsom refer to it as the nation of California. And so here's the thing: is I want California to have their own single payer. They got plenty of people. They can have some tax or user fee or something like that. They should get together, use the power of their purse, and have a single payer healthcare system within that state. And, I think it would fail for reasons of incentives,
right?
Because of the failure of market discipline when you make something allegedly free, by driving the best and brightest out of that profession. There's all kinds of arguments libertarians make all the time against universal health care. But nonetheless, I don't want it to fail. And if it resulted in some really poor homeless folks getting some medical treatment that they needed and otherwise wouldn't get, then great, knock yourself out. And I, similarly make UCLA and UC Berkeley free. I'll tell you what, could you imagine the applications? They already get great applicants, but imagine the applications if those schools were totally free. Make Stanford free.
Right.
Make Claremont McKenna free. I want them to have whatever gun laws they want to have.
Right.
I want them to have whatever abortion rules they want to have. I don't want people in California to wake up thinking, oh my gosh, Alabama is going to elect some cracker senator next month, and that guy's going to have a say over, Supreme Court justices, and they're going to try to eliminate Roe v. Wade or so. Just these crazy, stupid arguments.
Right.
And I'm just past the point of caring, and I know that there are. Look, Trump got more votes from California than any other state.
I know,
and there are tons of anti-state, anti-tax libertarians in California.
Sure.
And if California were allowed a healthy, a large degree of federalism, would they be harmed? Would they feel worse off? Yes, they would. Now, it's easier to move away from California to another state than it is to move to another country.
Right.
So, as a pragmatic matter, it'd be easier to vote with your feet. And maybe before such a system were implemented, there would need to be a 1-year grace period or something. I mean, who knows? But it's the who knows where we fall down as libertarians, right? The mechanics of things. We don't have good answers for the who knows. But I advocate a system like that. And I think that's where we need to be headed. This idea of separation versus persuasion, of being unyoked from one another politically, really interests me. And I think the left, if Donald Trump had won a second term, they would be getting very serious, because there was a lot of talk on the left after 2016. And I'm not talking about just the internet. I'm talking in like the nation,
right?
And, Harper's, mainstream left papers, publications about this. And so, but now that Biden's won, and now that they've taken the House and almost taken the Senate and yada, yada, there's probably a sense of inevitability on the left, and we're winning. So why would we let anyone opt out?
Right. Well, we saw that.
That's the rub.
We saw the same thing in reverse after Trump won. The Texas nationalists and all of that kind of disappeared. I mean, even the drive to stop enforcement of federal gun control went away when Trump was elected, even though Trump was actually worse on guns than Obama was. So, you see this flip-flop, and now you're starting to hear again, the right is all interested in nullification again, and you seeing more talk about secession in places like Texas. So there's always that flip-flop back and forth. If you're in power, then you're good with it, and if you're out of power, then you want to separate yourself from the harm that comes. And I think you made a great point. It is all about harm and imposing your will upon somebody else. And what a crappy way to order society or build relationships, right?
But if politics is about winning, politics is about war by other means.
Right.
So this idea of hypocrisy in politics is just silly.
Right.
You say, well, when their guy's in, they're for X, but when the other guy's in, they're against X. I mean, okay, hypocrisy in politics is like, that would be like worrying about dandruff on the battlefield or something while bombs are going off everywhere. I mean, it's a feature. It's required. It's not a bug. It's a feature. It has to be. And that, so it doesn't work. When you point out hypocrisy in politics, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
It would have worked by now. And we have to understand that because it's a feature, that just makes politics untenable, right? We fall into tribal roles, them and us, and we don't vote for people who hate our guts. And I think a lot of people felt like Hillary Clinton hated their guts.
Yeah.
I think that's why she lost. Maybe why she got
I
upset.
quit voting.
Yeah.
I feel like they all hate my guts.
So it's really a nasty thing. And
we politicized everything. I mean, chicken sandwiches are now political.
Yeah.
My mom went out to lunch with some of her friends, and two of them got in this big heated debate because one said, well, you shouldn't buy Coca-Cola because I don't even know what the reason is. Coca-Cola did something that was offensive politically, and so you shouldn't be drinking Coca-Cola. I mean, we've now politicized our soft drinks. It's really kind of insane.
Yeah, it's too bad. And the arguments that have happened, even among close friends and family members, over COVID and masks and vaccines, and certainly over Trump, the last 4 or 5 years since the Trump revolution or phenomenon or whatever you want to call it, this has gotten so much worse. I really dislike that. I really dislike that. And I can remember in my own youthful folly being like, how could I ever be friends with the statist? Because they want to use the state to harm me, and they want to steal from me via taxes and da-da-da. So, even though they might be a nice person or friendly to my face, because, I can't trust them. I could never be friends with them. And that's just bunk. Yeah. They just see the world differently.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, and so I have a real progressive pro-Obama older brother. And, and he's, very much into vaccines, and he's a computer guy. He works at Google. Mm-hmm. And so you can sort of imagine a technocratic left perspective of a software engineer at Google. And he's probably pretty down the middle for that worldview.
Right.
But, I'm not going to throw over my brother.
Right.
I've known him my whole life because he's older, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm certainly not going to throw him over for some libertarian who likes Rothbard. I could care less. This is my brother.
Right. And that kind of brings us full circle back to this idea of, community. And that's something that you find not only in churches. I mean, that's where we find community for our family, but we need community that is outside of this weird political thing. We need to just interact with people. Sports teams provide that kind of community. We need those associations that go beyond politics. And I think sometimes libertarians are a little bit guilty of politicizing everything too. And it's really not a healthy way to live. I mean, ultimately, this is another function of getting older. The older I get, the more I realize the importance of some of these other things above and beyond, the political stuff.
Well, the question before us really is, how do we tamp it down? How do we depoliticize America? That question interests me far more than left versus right, statist versus anarchist, however you want to frame it, red state versus blue state. How to depoliticize America, that interests me.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that we have great answers. I mean, we at the Mises Institute, we say, well, we want to educate people. We want to beat them over the head with 900-page books and, change hearts and minds at sort of the granular level. And we do change some hearts and minds.
Sure.
But, but how many hearts and minds relative to per capita, the overall growth in the population? That's not a happy question. Let's be frank. I mean, the last 50 years, almost 50 years since the Ethics of Liberty came out, I mean, I would argue that Rothbard's vision of the world has not at all prevailed.
Yeah, for sure.
And we got to be open and honest about that, and we have to rethink what we do. We have to, I think we start with war. I mean, you take you start with the low-hanging fruit where there's maybe the most cross ideological agreement. I mean, I don't know anybody who's for the continuing the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan at this point, who doesn't live in the Beltway and directly somehow, work in the foreign policy establishment. I mean, there's zero constituency anywhere for continuing these wars. And if you go to the left and say, let's say conservatively we've spent $6 trillion on Iraq and Afghanistan since 9/11. Mm-hmm. That number is going to continue to rise because certainly with Afghanistan, we'll be there forever like Korea.
Yeah.
We'll never leave. Maybe we'll leave Iraq, but we'll never leave Afghanistan. And so you're going to have continuing costs. And moreover, a cost which often goes unremarked is the ongoing VA treatment of all these younger people who've lost limbs, who have psychological problems. We're going to be paying that for years and years and years, because if you were a combat or active duty soldier assigned overseas, you're permitted to have VA care for life.
Right.
And so, if you told a lot of folks on the left, what if we had just left Saddam Hussein alone? What if we had not worried about the Taliban and we spent $6 or $7 trillion on, an admittedly cumbersome, faulty single-payer health system here in the U.S. at the federal level? I mean, I'd grit my teeth and say, "Oh my God, this is the VA meets the DMV."
Right.
But I think most people would say, "Yeah, I'd rather have that."
Yeah, I'd rather have that than millions of people dying.
Well, that's what that's politics.
Yeah,
we got W, and it's interesting that sometimes the least intellectual, most bumbling presidents, I think they have an unease or an insecurity. So I think Biden and W are very similar in that, W was Fredo of the Bush family.
Right.
He's the dumb one.
Right.
Biden, if you had gone back to when Biden first got in the Senate, and they were real senators then, I mean, they may have been corrupt and they may have had the wrong ideology, but they were real intellectuals. We're talking much more of an Ivy League feel to the U.S. Senate 40 years ago. Mm-hmm. Daniel Patrick Moynihan, people like that. Right. Real intellects. And if you had told them, fast forward and Joe Biden at 70, whatever, I don't know, is Biden 80, whatever he is.
However old.
I mean, that he's going to be president. They would have laughed their asses off.
Yeah,
because
what?
Because Biden is dumb. He's had a plagiarized thing. I think he flunked the bar exam. I mean, he basically became a honcho in a glorified county known as Delaware, because lots of counties in Texas are bigger than the state of Delaware.
True.
And I assume along the way he did what he had to do to make the DuPont family happy, because they sort of ran Delaware for a long time, the DuPont chemical fortune. And so you fast forward and you get this kind of dumb guy. And so you take a really smart guy like Bill Clinton, a really smart guy. If Bill Clinton had been born into W circumstances, rich family, or if W had been born into Bill Clinton circumstances, he'd be a carpet salesman somewhere.
Yeah.
Right. But Bill Clinton was a legitimately smart guy and a legitimately skilled politician.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Bill Clinton looks like a pro compared to these presidents we've had since. He was an intellectual Fulbright scholar or whatever, but he wasn't a transformational president.
Yeah.
Fast forward to W, we get Medicare Part D, which is, more costly than the underlying Medicare.
Right.
We get No Child Left Behind, which just fully federalized education. We get 2 wars of choice or convenience or whatever you want to call them in Iraq and Afghanistan. I mean, the W was a transformational president. We also get the Patriot Act and Ashcroft and John Yoo, the unitary executive theory. We get the Department of Homeland Security. I mean, the first U.S. department really since I guess Reagan. I mean, so there was real transformation taking place there. And if you fast forward, like Medicare Part D is a much bigger deal than Obamacare. So you have an intellectual guy, or at least apparently intellectual guy in Obama, who really wasn't a transformational president other than he was the first black president.
Right.
And so it would be strange, wouldn't it, if it's the bumbling, doddering octogenarian Biden who creates these huge transformational things and not Obama, who is the young, JFK analog or something.
Yeah.
And so that's how it works. Sometimes I think you need to package the revolutionaries in the dunce's clothing.
That's interesting. Yeah. I hadn't really thought about that, but you're absolutely right. And boy, you're seeing a lot of stuff come down the pike with Biden. So,
yeah, and man, oh man, if you double capital gains taxes, here's a great example of where the left and the right are viewing different movies.
Right.
Of America. A lot of folks on the left, and certainly those in the hardcore Keynesian or MMT camps, modern monetary theory, they just don't believe that capital accumulation and reinvestment is how you have an economy. They just fundamentally don't buy that.
Nope.
They think that stimulus and money and credit and buying stuff and consumption and giving people free stuff and giving people higher wages by fiat and giving people, houses and stuff. That's how you build an economy. And I want to be fair here. I mean, I'm saying that they really believe that in a good faith way.
Yeah.
Okay. They absolutely believe that. So it's the antithesis of sort of the Austrian Cantillon Say's law view, which is that production precedes consumption in every way, shape, and form. And so if you don't think that capital accumulation matters, as a matter of fact, if you think it's a bad thing that there's no, then what follows from that, Mike, is that there's no trade-off to doubling capital gains taxes. That's not going to affect employment or you're literally just saying, hey, not only is there no downside, there's actually an upside because these rich guys, well, it's capital, have to pay more taxes. And then hopefully those taxes can be used to help poor people.
Right.
So there's just all upside. There's no trade-off. A lot of folks on the left won't even acknowledge that there's a trade-off in, you double the tax on something, you get less of it.
Right.
So here's where Americans are viewing at least 2 different movies, if not 3 or 4. And I think it was Clue. Remember they made a movie out of Clue, the board game?
I do remember that. I never saw it, but I heard it was awful.
But they made 4 or 5 different endings.
Yeah.
And I think it was a gimmick to get people to go see the movie more than once.
Right.
And so, like, instead of, Mr. So-and-so did it in the kitchen with the candlestick, There were different endings. And so I sometimes think America's watching different movies. And so a lot of that's based on, what media, social or otherwise, are you consuming?
Right.
So you don't even have to say that everyone's entitled to their own opinion, but not their own facts. We can take the same facts and view them selectively. We can boost and amplify certain facts and downplay other facts. We all know the media does that. Left and right both complain about that. So it's even the same facts can yield very different perceptions. And I don't know how you overcome that other than to make all this politics matter less.
Yeah.
To de-escalate and de-weaponize, these perceptions that crystallize into politics.
Well, I agree. I don't know that we've solved anything here, but it's been a great discussion.
Yeah, I don't know that we've solved anything other than I wish people would look at things locally.
Yeah.
More than they do now.
It's the old Brian McClanahan. His mantra always sticks in my head: think locally, act locally.
Yeah, it's tough to get people to do when we're all following the bouncing ball, the endless diversions on social media. But it's maybe something that we're going to have to do if we keep having shocks like COVID. Because if COVID taught us anything, all of a sudden when travel shut down.
Yeah.
All of a sudden when businesses shut down, it's that at some point you have a physical body, corporeal body, and that body has to reside somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
On a piece of ground with hopefully a roof over your head.
Right.
And somehow things like water and electricity and food and medicine have to get to you physically.
Right.
There's the digital world has its limits.
It
and
does.
I think that's what we learned.
Yeah. And that's a good lesson. That's an important lesson to remember. So what's going on over at the Mises Institute that people need to know about?
Well, we had a big shift when COVID came along. We sort of threw everything at that, and trying to understand the scientism and the trade-offs and the long-term harms. Because COVID was all about the seen and the unseen.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And in my opinion, social scientists, particularly economists, do a bad job of showing us the unseen. So we've been focused on that, but this year hopefully is a new year where we have a really great medical freedom conference. It's a day-long thing up in New Hampshire coming up in June, it's going to be a bunch of doctors and practitioners and healthcare people and insurance people and people talking about the UK and Canadian systems. And we're going to have a real roundtable over,
cool.
Hey, what could we do in terms of medical tourism, in terms of markets? And so that's there's no area of the economy probably more lacking in market incentives than that. So if you're interested in that, we're going to stream it, and you can go to mises.org/events and check it out.
Cool. I'll put a link to that. I know you're having your supporters summit in my old stomping ground, St. Petersburg, this year. I'm excited about that.
Yes, absolutely. We're going to be back in Florida because that's the only state where we can comfortably schedule events where we know that the venue is not going to change the terms on us or something.
Right.
So sure, Florida's getting a lot of business just because of that.
Well, if judging by the traffic on I-95, that's a certainty. Well, I appreciate you taking time out of your day to chat, and we'll put links to all that. Appreciate the work that y'all are doing over at the Mises Institute. It's been a big part of my journey, and hearts and minds being changed. I was definitely one of them, and the resources that is provided by the Mises Institute has been helpful. There's no place in the world that you can get more free stuff to read than at the Mises Institute. Maybe at the library or something, but just being able to click on all these wonderful books and documents and papers, having all that at your fingertips is pretty amazing. So y'all are doing the Lord's work, so to speak.
All right. Well, thanks. It was great chatting with you today, Mike.
Likewise. Thank you. All right. Well, with that, we're going to wrap up this episode of the GodArchy podcast. I hope you enjoyed that discussion with Jeff. Hope you got something out of it. Appreciate you listening. If you like what we're doing here at GodArchy, you can be a supporting listener. You can support this work and also support other individuals and organizations that need our support. And you can do that by being one of my Patreon supporters. You can do that over at patreon.com/GodArchy. And one of the things that I do is 40% of my Patreon receipts are then sent off to other individuals and organizations who either need help or who are furthering the cause of Christ or the cause of libertarianism. So it's a way to put voluntaryism into action, to reach out as a community, a small community of listeners to this show, and to reach out to other folks. So again, would really appreciate your support. I could use it. Others could use it. And you can check that out at patreon.com/GodArchy. You can also donate directly from the GodArchy website, godarchy.org. There's a PayPal donation link there that you can use if you don't want to do the Patreon thing. So that is going to be a wrap. I hope you have a great couple of weeks. Again, thank you so much for supporting, listening to the show. And hey, I'll talk to y'all again next time.
Well, ain't you gonna lay my armor down? Ain't you gonna lay my armor down? Ain't you gonna lay my armor down?
Oh, you ready for me? Excuse me. You have been listening to the GodArchy podcast in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit with Mike Maharry. GodArchy is an oh my goodness production. You can find us on the World Wide Web at GodArchy.org, on the Facebook at GodArchy.org, and on the Twitter at GodArchy. If you want to get in touch, email us at info@GodArchy.org, but no stupid questions, please. And you can support the show at Patreon.com. Get in that pocketbook and get some money out. This ain't cheap to do. Thank you for listening. Thank you. And God bless you all in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit.